I like the closed thing.
When you've been on
Okay.
the board long enough?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Valentine's Day version of a board committee meeting. And this is the Government Relations and Communications Committee meeting. We would like to begin with introductions because we have an extra special introduction today. And I think we'll toss that off to our administrative liaisons for their admin remarks because those are sort of one and the same. We have two introductions, actually, because we have two new people at our table. You want me to just keep rolling? Okay, I'll roll.
Taking the steam out. She's rolling.
So we're happy to announce that although our student representative, Liz Dustin, wasn't able to make it today, we have a teacher representative, Amy McNally from Adner Middle School, joining us, joining our committee. So we're delighted to have you as an addition to our grouping here. And also the first committee meeting officially for our new superintendent, Mr. Ken Batchelor. So it's nice. And I just thought Valentine's Day, we forgot to bring the hearts candies or whatever. But since many of us are wearing red, we will celebrate the day, even despite the meeting, and open up with our administrative remarks and a review of the minutes after, public comment after that, and then review of the minutes, approval of the minutes.
The comment I would like to address is in regards to the AP exam subsidy. As we spoke about, I believe in November or December, the subsidy at the state level has gone away with the new implementation of ESSA. PDE's response is that they'll reimburse us, the school district, for any outlay that we make for the spring AP exams to help defray the costs for students who receive free and reduced lunch. So I spoke with Dr. McQuiggan, and we'll work out a practice with the high school in regards to how they apply for that. They would have applied already because they weren't notified until recently that the money was no longer there. Then we will outlay the expense and then seek reimbursement in our, I believe it's going to be part of the consolidated federal grant that's due in the summer.
That's terrific. Thank you for closing the loop on that. So we know that our students, like Lydia, are taken care of and will be able to have their subsidy that they've been counting on for their AP exam. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Kane. Any other admin remarks from Mr. Petiti at this point? No? Okay, well then let's go to public comment. Is there any public comment this afternoon? I believe, do we have our public comment sign-in book over there? We're missing the sign, but.
The papers on the table.
Okay, not in the beautiful frame?
I left it at the township.
That's okay. We can get you a second frame, I think.
Am I? Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Morning. Good afternoon.
Yes.
It's Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne. I forget where I live.
We know where you
Yeah,
are.
we know where.
And happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Thank you. Same to you.
My first comment, and I'm hoping that Mr. Petiti will cover this in his comments, is an update on the videotaping or streaming or live broadcast from the administration building of the committee meetings. I understand that if I remember from your remarks, that you were going to investigate whether RAD TV could do it, and talk with, 2 years ago, Comcast, you had addressed Comcast about this, whether or not there were any updates, or you would work with Applied Video Technology. It would really be great if we could get these shown live for anyone interested in the public, since they are in the middle of the afternoon. Probably more of the public cannot make it here during the day as could make it to the evening meetings. And also, I was happy to see once again the legislative update of what's coming in the future and what has been presented on. And I understand we're going to have a review of a few that have already made it through the Senate. I was interested to see that school choice expansion is going to be sought at the state and the national level. Pennsylvania's addressing that. And also, What was interesting is on page 5, this teacher tax credit for expenses that they incur for purchasing things for their classrooms. And a number that kind of jumped out at me is because it says that the credits approved by the department shall not exceed 15 million in any fiscal year. That's a heck of a lot of, and I noticed the teacher representative got it. That's a heck of a lot of supplies to buy in, I know this, in the state, and I was just curious to see that figure. It also looks like they're going to be putting or working on a bill for kindergarten class size, prohibiting classes to be any larger than 20 students. And I was wondering where we fell in our kindergarten. And then opening of school after Labor Day, which was kind of interesting, not allowing schools to open prior to Labor Day. Curious that the state would get involved in that. And one other, based on the communication policy that Mr. Petiti is working on, is to make sure that, or to request that the survey that's being sent out to the parents and the public be reviewed possibly by the committee or the board before it goes out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Here she comes, Dr. Winters.
Roberta Winters, 326 Williams Road in Rosemont, and I would just like to thank this committee for attaching, as Ms. Bertle said, the updated legislation that's perhaps going to come into reality, and also to encourage members of the public to do their best to write and telephone and email their state and local legislators at every opportunity, because things are happening very fast and furiously, and it's important to stay up to date. One of the things that's probably going to impact people directly is the state budget, and I know it's a work in progress, but I think it's important to let your legislators know what your priorities are, so that in fact education, and particularly early childhood education and other things, can be put at the top of your list. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for the public comment. Let's move to the approval of minutes. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the minutes? Yes. Okay. Anything we want to change? No, I think the minutes are therefore approved, and we'll move into agenda item number 1, which will be an update on our communications policy that's in development.
Okay, so the past few meetings I've gone over just kind of where we are so far with the development of this policy, and similarly, we're moving towards a first draft, which per our timeline is to be presented in the April meeting. That's a first full draft. We will review a progress draft actually next meeting. So to get there, still fleshing out this different sections of the policy. I talked about those last meeting. And really, it's kind of just a philosophy, how we can communicate with the public, the role of the department, our definitions, if we have any that we need to explain in the policy. And again, I talked about this before, it's important that we establish the district recognized groups policy along the way here, because again, that is what's going to allow us to say, here's what we can offer these groups based upon what they're recognized as in that accompanying policy. I wanted to work that into this policy, but it's possible that we won't have that policy passed in time, so it may be something we need to do in the ARs. I know our plan was to hopefully have the AR come out at the same time as the policy, but if 915.1, I think, is the district recognized groups policy, isn't ready yet, we'll have to kind of push the AR back. But the policy is moving along, and we are at a point now where we can get the survey queued up and be released. That's due to go out March 1st. So last night I sat down with the PTO Coordinating Council and went over some of the ideas for the survey with them, and they gave me some good feedback, which I can incorporate into some of the questions, and they also offered to help us with promoting the survey to the parents. So I'll be sure to reach out to Michelle Leonard, who is the director of the, I guess, PTO district-wide coordinator, and have her help me with getting the word out to the PTOs. And then we'll also put some on the website. I have a communications plan that I'm developing to make sure that it gets into the different areas where people can get access to the link, and also the staff. Actually, Ms. McNally and I spoke a few months ago about having her help me out potentially with getting the word out to the teachers, and also I plan to reach out to Mr. Wood so he can help with distributing the link to the staff survey. So things are moving along, and we are on schedule, and that's really the only update I have to give this month. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I just have a quick question. Mike, I have a quick question about the initiatives and how, if someone is bringing forth an initiative, how will that get communicated to you so that you will be part of that rollout? Will that be in the ARs? Will that be in the communication policy?
I'm assuming you mean, let's say that a separate department has a project or a new, like I said, an initiative to do, and you want to make sure that part of that process is involving communications in it. I would think that will be in the philosophy section of the policy, so that it would be embedded in there that our philosophy as a district is to consider communications whenever we do anything on a large scale or anything of a level of an initiative that requires a lot of explaining or a lot of information sharing, that an important aspect of that initiative is considering how we're going to communicate it.
Okay. Now,
And I guess the details will be what we put into the AR, as Kevin mentioned.
you had mentioned the other organizations that will be recognized and have a part in our organization and where they would fit. You would see them coming and taking part of your department of communicating things. Would that be, if I'm a recognized organization now within the district and I want to communicate something out, I think one of the things we had talked about was a uniform way of communicating things, that we let all of our constituents know what's going on, and that would be communicated to these groups as they come on board, once they're recognized.
Yes, what we're trying to accomplish is that right now, and I was speaking with the PTO Coordinating Council last night, right now there's no kind of framework where if you belong to this group or if you come to me with a request to send out a news release or post something on the website or put something in our newsletter, it's kind of a one-by-one, case-by-case basis. So the hope would be that if we establish certain group criteria, when these people fit into these groups, they get a website posting, a news release, and then we can just say, you fit here, so you get these services.
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Mike, do you have any questions? Mrs. McNally, do you have any questions? No. Solomon? No? Everybody good? I had one point of clarification, and forgive me, Michael, maybe going forward, if we attach the progress report of the plan, at every meeting, that might be helpful, just so I can not have to ask you that question, I can refer to it. But are we doing 3 separate surveys, one for parents, one for staff, and one for community? Or is it the same survey that's going out to all 3 constituents?
I believe we talked about holding off on the community survey. That was going to be like a later survey we were going to do, if I recall from past meetings, and we were going to focus on parents and staff at this point, and then maybe throughout the process, either after the communications policy is passed or as it's being developed, towards the end of this process, we would poll the public. I think that's what we had discussed.
That makes sense.
Would the staff and the parent survey be one and the same?
No, I have some
2 separate surveys.
I have some questions that are specific to staff in terms of internal communication, how they receive information that's through the school or that just staff needs to know. So obviously they want to be applicable to parents. But some of the questions are similar in vein, but there are a few that are specific to each group.
Okay. So the community survey, though, that feedback will be incorporated before we have a final policy. It's just maybe not exactly at the same time that we're collecting parent and staff feedback, is that right? Or-
I'm not, I wasn't really clear when we spoke. It seemed that was not integral to the development of this policy. It seemed that's something we wanted to get feedback from the public, of course, on how we're doing with communications. But it seemed to me, at least from what I recall, the parents and the staff were what we wanted to get done prior to the final development of this policy. And if the public needed to be polled next fall, we would poll them too, but they want to be part of the development process of the policy.
Well, I don't know how the rest of the committee feels about that. I think I'm getting a sense that Lydia is okay with that timeline.
Okay with that.
I'm a little, I must say, I'm a little concerned that if we want to have a policy that effectively reaches all of our constituents, I'm just wondering if we're missing something, if we don't send something to the community at large to get some feedback to inform how we're doing. I guess I'm having trouble understanding what getting the feedback after the policy's passed would do for us, that would help us, give us the roadmap we need to do the best job we possibly can with communication.
Yeah, I guess my thought was we're writing this policy independent of the survey results. The survey results will help us in some regards as we create the policy to inform us, maybe in the administrative regulations portion, and how we roll things out. Mm-hmm. And we had talked about them being on kind of parallel tracks, but because of the possibility of having an out-of-house company do the survey, we might have to push that back. So we don't want to wait to draft the policy until we got the results back. So I guess my thought was when the public information comes back, we can see how that relates to what we put out in the policy and move accordingly. But if you feel that we need to have these responses from the public in prior to finalizing the survey, we may want to look at the timeline or how we're distributing the surveys and when.
Well, I think as you had said, at the next meeting, you're going to bring us back a sketch of what the policy might cover. Mm-hmm. And I think at that point, at least for me, I would be able to then have a sense of where you see feedback from surveys being inserted into the policy, and I personally could judge better at that point. So maybe we hold off on a final weigh-in on that until we have something concrete in front of us, as opposed to more speculative. What do you all think? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, well, I think it would depend on what the purpose of it is.
Mm-hmm.
What's the purpose of communicating to the public? As far as the policy would go, I think our policy, we understand what our purpose is of that. I think the survey is going to come back is how we're actually going to communicate. Is that correct? More than what the purpose of it is.
I think that's what Mike is saying, is that I don't know that you're going to get anything from these surveys that's going to change our policy.
I do understand. I'm trying to clarify that. That's why I asked Mike.
Thank you. Yes. I look at the policy, at least what I thought was more of an overarching kind of guideline. Okay. I know we don't want to put a whole lot of details in there because that's more what the AR is for. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be handcuffed by what the strict language of this policy. That's kind of what policies, I believe, at least from my time here, are supposed to be.
Right.
More broad. So I guess that's why I was thinking we want to write this policy in that vein. Mm-hmm. And then when we get the results back from the surveys, we might be able to work into how we deliver the communication in the administrative regulations.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think that
I agree with that.
Yep, I do too. I think that that's a solid framework, is to lay it out from 30,000 feet in the policy. And then once it's established in the policy what the communications department is doing, how it does it, will be in the AR. Yes, it'll be more of a philosophical statement and designate the territory within the district that communications interfaces with, and then how they do that will be the AR, and the survey from the constituents will fit into the how we do it kind of piece. Okay,
that's the way I was
that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
We're going to get there.
Yeah, we will.
It's been a long road, but much
Oh, but
needed,
steady.
and
Yes.
haste makes waste. So let's do it. If we're going to do it right. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item number 2. the board resolution that we passed, was it last week? I'm losing track of time. 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago. Okay, so we'd like to revisit that because the special meeting that we held to discuss and ultimately pass this board resolution opposing the elimination of property taxes, we didn't really have a chance to discuss where we were going from there. We were just working on getting the policy crafted and passed. So, Mr. Kane, would you like to review for us some of the steps that we've taken since the policy passed, and then we'll open it up for any other ideas on the committee of where we can go from here?
Okay. Yes, so 2 weeks ago, we had the resolution passed opposing property tax elimination. The communication page for that is on our main page. The website is at the top of where it has headlines, asking residents to help contact our legislatures. So you click on that, and it will bring up a whole bunch of small writing. But it'll have the video, has the resolution, it has the different organizations.
Control plus.
Oh, there you go. Well, you still can't read it, but.
Keep doing it.
Okay, did I hit minus? I don't want. Okay, so this is where you go for all the stuff in regards to opposing elimination of school property tax. So in addition to our website, it was distributed to over 40 legislators, including both the Senate and the House education committees, the finance committees, as well as the governor. So they all received hard copies of that. It was sent out over Penn link, and Penn link is a way that school districts can communicate with other school districts via email. And so it was sent out to over 500 school districts, and then the IUs as well as the charters. So the information has been distributed, and so this page sort of walks you through the whole process. Has the resolution there, the PowerPoint that was attached, and then down at the bottom it talks about how to take action. And I guess that's specifically what we're seeking from our community, is that the board passing a resolution is just one part. It is the community members, regardless of where you live, if this is something that you oppose. There's a sample letter provided. Here specifically it has your Radnor representatives for certainly our faculty who might not live in Radnor. You'd send things to your own representatives. It has the finance committee, all the staff that we discussed, as well as how to contact the governor. And so we're interested in trying to get as much information out to the community as possible regarding this. As of yet, nothing's been introduced. We know the governor's budget came out last week, and Mrs. Goldman will be discussing that at the end of the meeting. The concern at the time, and the reason that we had the rush of getting this passed, was because there was concern that the legislative group might put forth such a recommendation or such a bill at the same time that the governor's budget came out. As of yet, nothing happened, but I believe I forwarded today, more school districts are doing opposing resolutions. So school districts are taking this seriously. So I think that has to do with some of the information coming out from PSBA and the different local reps like Mr. Madden. Mm-hmm. So that's all we have for that.
That's great. Thank you for all that effort, sending out the 40 letters and the one to the governor.
Okay, so our letters did go out to the governor, and who are the 40 people? The 40 people on the committee?
Yeah, so each committee, if you look down here, the Pennsylvania Senate Finance Committee went to the chairs and the co-chairs. It went to the chairs and co-chairs of the Education Committee, plus all the representatives that are part of those committees. So all the senators and representatives that are part of the Senate and House Education Committees. So they all received individual letters. It's like 20 in each side, and then you add in the finance groups, and so that adds like an extra 4.
So
then you got the governor. So
it also went to the committee members of the finance committees, or just
it went to the chairs.
Just to the chairs of finance, but to the
committees.
committee members of education.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Kevin, that page looks really nice. Looks really great. But Oh, Michael, looks really nice. But quick question, and you may have already said this, or you may all already know this, but that page looks awesome. Is there some kind of email blast or something to let people to know to go to that page to take a look at it? Only because I know I'm on the website often, but maybe some people don't think to go on it so often, or that particular page. And also to faculty and staff, are we kind of sending anything? Because I think the faculty and staff would love to hear what you guys did, because this was great work. So is there any kind of other communication kind of directing them to that page, since it's so important?
Sure, thanks, Amy. We're working on a short letter that's going to go out, I believe, from our board president, notifying the community, and we'll certainly let the staff know through an all-district email. The good news is we featured it pretty prominently in the Reader, the electronic newsletter, the week after, the Sunday after we passed the resolution, and I'm happy to say we had about 300 or so clicks on that specific link alone, which is a very high amount compared to what we normally receive through that newsletter for one story. So some people have already accessed it, but yes, we will be doing some more outreach.
That's a great thing to include in the minutes. I think that the 300 links, I mean, would you say that that's double typically what happens for? I mean, can you give us some sort of a sense of?
Yes, I was surprised, frankly, with the response that it received. Typically we'll get, for one specific piece alone, maybe 50, 60, 100, but to have 300 for one that's of that serious magnitude, that's not, frankly, people like pictures. A lot of people click on the photo links. So for something like that, I think was a nice response.
Now, let me ask you this question. Do you think, can you measure how many people clicked on the link for the letter, the sample letter?
I can.
So why don't we see if we can bring that back next time, because that's really the next step after reading about it, if you're going to click on the link to look at the letter, because we've never had a way to really measure when we pass resolutions how many people, and my could be wrong, so tell me if I'm misstating something here, but I'd love to be able to quantify how many people reacted to it, did in fact take action. So clicking on the letter doesn't mean they necessarily sent one, but that's getting us a little bit closer to what the community engagement is. And if we can try to think of a way where we can get some measurement of whether or not people sent letters, I think that would be good data for us to have. And maybe that's a part of the email that's about to come out. We can think about, is there a way, whether it's hit reply all if you agree, or a quick survey question at the bottom. Would you like something like that? Because measuring the community response, I think, is really helpful to us and takes our advocacy to the next level. We can say that 20% of our community wrote letters, or 20% of our, even the data of how many people opened the sample letter. That kind of thing, I think, is persuasive when we go and talk to our legislators and harness that. The other thing I just wanted to ask the committee really quickly, is there anything that you think we should be doing in terms of outreach to other communities that we're not doing? Chuck and I were supposed to, he wasn't able to make it at the last minute, but not long after we passed the resolution, I had breakfast with the vice president of the Downingtown School Board, who had, their community had passed this resolution, and the chair of the legislative committee of the Lower Merion School Board, who was interested in how Downingtown and I had gone about it. We also invited Haverford to join us, and someone from Garnet Valley who wasn't able to make it because they had passed resolutions as well, and trying to see if we could brainstorm among us how to create a school board coalition or talk tour, maybe, of going around and trying to tap into other districts and see if we can build a coalition, not even necessarily restricted to our county, but in the region of those districts who feel as strongly about this as we do. So we can build on that. I just was wondering if anybody on the committee is in favor of an effort like that, or has any suggestions for how we might go about it otherwise. I mean, I left that meeting with the suggestion from the two people I was with that we create some materials and we really just set up meetings and we go and talk to some of these other boards.
Well, so why don't we work through RIU to do that? Because I think there's a huge amount of interest in this from the press conference and just their response to it. I would say Delaware County is pretty united behind what we're doing. So wouldn't it be easier than reinventing the wheel to put it on your next agenda down at the IU?
Well, it is on our agenda.
Yeah.
The Legislative Council has been discussing this, and at our last meeting, Haverford actually took our
Yes.
resolution and said that this is fantastic, and I don't think they may have changed the name, but I was quite pleased to hear that by Haverford. And the Delaware County Legislative Council, we need to increase the amount of people that actually come to the meetings. It's not quite as many as we would like to have there, so the message is getting out to the same few people that come there. So it's not reinventing the wheel, but maybe we need to reconstruct it a little bit because of the fact that it's not really doing, I don't think, the best job that it could do.
So you're saying you have a flat tire?
We have a flat tire.
That's a good one, Lydia.
Mr. Madden, what about your involvement with PSBA as a regional?
Well, you're right. I just went to my first training on that. And there actually is a paid employee from PSBA who works out of Norristown, who I'm tracking down, and will invite her to come over and talk with us and find out what they can actually do. And these are some of the things that we can charge her to do to bring us together, because she not only would take care of Region 15, Delaware County, Chester County, she also does Bucks, Montgomery County, and Philadelphia County. So we would be able to spread some of this out. And the people who we know are already interested, we can put them on the list and then maybe build it so that when a resolution does come out, if it's a resolution from whatever it would be, Delaware County District or Region 15 or whatever, it could be passed by all those within that region. And I think once we get it moving, the superintendents need to be involved with it. So we would look for Ken to help us to move that forward through them, because they have a better handle, I think, on the individual district and whether there's somebody in that who's interested in that and would want to push it forward. To me, this is the biggest issue that has faced Pennsylvania since 2 years ago when they almost passed it. If this passes, schools as we know will no longer exist within 5 years. And the only argument that I have heard was the way we tax was put in place before we were a country, so we need to change it. Okay? Well, it's not the best system there is. It's like democracy. It's not a very good system, but it's the best one that we have. So right now, what they're putting forward is going to destroy what we have. Just to say we need to change it and get rid of it, it's not the way to do it correctly. So we need to push back and say, yeah, we agree things have to be done, but we have to do it the right way so we don't endanger the public school systems in Pennsylvania. So I think it's something that I'll have more information as we go, but it's out there, I think, on everybody's radar. Some of the districts that are in favor of it are basically in favor of it because the way the system is that they're drowning right now because of the property taxes, because of the property base that they have, but that's not going to improve. So they're looking at this bill as it's going to be eliminated, it's a savior bill, and it really isn't. So to me, they're being sold a bill of goods that aren't very good.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of districts.
Yeah.
A lot of districts that are for it have a lot of income right now from the fracking, but that, I mean, if you ever seen the yield curve on a gas well, it's 90% in 2 years, and then it tanks. So they're going to have a lot of money in 2 years, and then 4 years, 5 years from now, they're done.
Well, part of the big issue, I think, that a lot of people don't visit too often, the hold harmless, and if Radnor's getting over 20,000 per student, and another district is getting under 10. When all the money goes to Harrisburg, we're going to still get whatever we get, and they're going to get what they get. So it's not really fixing anything right off the bat. And
Until they amend it 2 years later and
yeah,
screw everything.
Right. So it's a bad situation that we're in, but we'll keep you posted.
Be like
Okay.
California.
Yes.
So can we put as an action item for next time that we will, first of all, as we get the letter ready to roll out from our board president, maybe some kind of metrics to see both how many people click on the letter, how many people maybe open the email, or maybe even if there's a survey question that helps elicit some additional feeling of how the community is responding to this. And maybe by next month also, we will have met or could
Try to
invite
contact
the IU, the Region 15 PSBA person, and even get an update on what the IU Legislative Council is doing, so that we have some addition, we keep this moving and don't let this get stagnant, because we can't afford that,
I
obviously.
also think we have to look past our school community. That's why the entire community, the people who may be looking at this, they are divided into groups. And we have to be very careful that we're not dividing our community into groups. It's not a school community and the whole community. It's the whole community needs to understand what we're up to. So eventually, we do have to get that information out to everybody.
The business associations.
Business, right.
If this kills the schools, it's going to kill the property values.
Right,
and then
right.
Right.
That could be something.
I just wanted to take a moment just to thank Kevin and Michael and Michelle and the administrators involved in crafting this and quickly putting it all together, and also, thank the board for how quickly the board came together and unified in this and working together on this, because I think as Chuck, as Mr. Madden was saying, it's an important issue, and that everybody moved quickly and worked together to get this done. So I just wanted to thank you for it.
Just a
Thank you. Sure.
follow up with that, Mrs. Goldman. I was wondering, with your involvement in the past with the PTOs, is this something, is there a state level of parent-teacher organizations? I'm trying to think of the constituencies that are far-reaching, Mr. Madden with PSBA, Mrs. McNally with PSEA.
Right.
Certainly there's strength in numbers,
Right.
but the actual education in the schools is going to be parents are going to, or children are going to feel that. So I'm wondering if you have more.
PTOs do not have a governing body, but PTAs do, and we don't have, ours are not PTAs. So, and there's when you're a PTA, you pay dues to the national organization, and they have much more of an emphasis on advocacy than the PTOs do. So we really have to create our own parent network, the PTOs, and I think maybe bringing this forward perhaps at the next coordinating council to create some brainstorming. I mean, I think we do a great job of communicating within our own community, but maybe this is thinking outside the box for some of the PTO presidents to start networking outside of Radnor, and together maybe they can try to find a way to do that. I think among us, we have a fair number of contacts in other districts, so it might be something for a PTO coordinating council agenda item for March or something. We can maybe, Mr. Kane, you can come by and make an appeal. We'll all be there, Joy. Right. or not, but I think that's where it would be best heard, is at a PTO coordinating council meeting. I think that's the collective energy and synergy of that might move this forward from a parent perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, some good brainstorming, so thank you, everybody. Let's move on to the DCIU legislation update. Yes, I'm
Before
sorry.
we leave, because I rarely get an opportunity to thank the two gentlemen over here for the work that you do on the website. And I think that's fantastic that people can go there, they can get information, they can contact their legislators, they can be updated on what's really happening, and that's fantastic. So I'd like to thank you both for that, and whoever else is involved in making it happen.
In fact, yes, in our letter, I'm sure we will tout the website, right? The note going out saying, please visit the website for copious amounts of information that is very clearly and thoroughly presented. So thank you, Mr. Madden. So moving on to the DCIU legislation update. I just wanted to mention, because I know it came up in public comment, you'll notice that the legislation update, because it's the beginning of the January session, the new session, is quite extensive. And there's proposed legislation out there of all shapes, sizes, stripes, and I think I could be off on this, but it's my recollection that I read somewhere that only 7% of legislation introduced in any given legislative session actually becomes law. So while we all get excited about, or discouraged maybe, or frightened by some of the things that might be out there. I think we need to keep in mind that much of this stuff, government being what it is, sometimes never sees the light of day. And even if it gets, and the things we talk about today are not things that have actually been called for votes for the full House or full Senate, but legislation usually starts within a committee. And it has to be called within the committee for a vote. So there might be 8 or 9 pieces of legislation that come up in any given committee, but the chair of the committee has to call it for a vote, or it's dead right even in committee. So what we're going to talk about briefly today is some of the activity of the Pennsylvania State Senate and House of Representatives based on their activity. And on the 31st of January, the State Senate had a meeting, and the Education Committee of the State Senate had a meeting. They have a new majority chair, John Eichelberger, and Andy Dinneman remains their minority chair. And they had a bunch of legislation currently in the committee, and I think you'll see that, or perhaps I'm reading off of a separate document that may not have been attached. But what we wanted to call your attention to was that on the 31st, there were 3 Senate bills that they did discuss in their meeting. One was 227. 228 was supposed to be discussed and did not end up being discussed, and number 229. 227 was a piece of legislation that had to do with school superintendent contract legislation. And what this legislation would do, and it passed out of committee by a pretty, as I remember, 11 yeas and 1 nay, so it passed out overwhelmingly, is that it would change the number of days in which an automatic renewal of a contract would take effect. So that the school board would need to notify a district superintendent or assistant superintendent instead of 150 days prior to the expiration of their contract, it would be reduced to 90 days prior to the expiration of the contract. And according to the legislation, that would allow the school board more time to make their final contract renewal decisions. Additionally, the legislation limits the automatic renewal of these contracts to 1 year if the renewal notice deadline is missed, as opposed to having the full contract be automatically renewed. So that passed out of the Senate Education Committee by an 11-to-1 vote. That would now go to the Senate. It won't necessarily be, now it's up to the Senate president to decide if he, I believe, wants to call it for a vote. And so we just wanted to give you, of all the things that have been going on, that one had a little traction. Number 228 did not get discussed. That would be expanding the ability of school districts to furlough school employees based on economic conditions, which is not currently part of the school code. That did not get discussed, but that is legislation that was slated to be discussed. And the other thing that passed out of committee by a very narrow margin, 7-5, was Senate Bill 229, which is public school sick and sabbatical leave mandates, which would remove mandated sick and bereavement leave benefits and instead make both subject to collective bargaining negotiations. The proposal would give school districts the option of requiring employees to use vacation or sick days for these events or allow a special leave in those circumstances. And second, the proposed legislation would eliminate a professional employee's entitlement to a sabbatical leave. So, needless to say, if that gets some traction, we'll be having some, I'm sure, interesting discussions around that. But it is now out of the Senate Education Committee and has been referred to the Senate, so to potentially be called for a vote someday. So that's what we wanted to update you in terms of activity at the Senate Education Committee level. And then at the House level, there were 4 recent votes on 5 different pieces of legislation when they met on February 6th. So those pieces of legislation had to do with EITC, an Educational Improvement Tax Credit. That passed out of committee. The other bill was amends the Public School Code to provide civil immunity to school bus drivers administering EpiPens. The other thing that passed out of committee was graduation requirements for CTE students, and that passed 27-0. That's not a surprise because that's all part of the Act 1 conversation. And House Bill 178 was about school security drills, saying that within I think the first 2 weeks of school, you need to have a school security drill. That passed 27-0 out of the House the Education Committee. And then there's always one, I think this is Mr. Miller's bill of interest, and this is he wrote it, yes. This is by Representative Godshall. This was actually passed unanimously out of the Education Committee. It was the opening of schools after the Labor Day holiday piece of legislation that would mandate that all school districts not start school until after the Labor Day holiday. It was referred to the Recreation and Tourism Committee for their vote, and they will be meeting on March 16th or 17th, I believe. I think you have that on your calendar, right, Mike? So that bill will be going to that committee for. And teachers too, okay. So there's a bunch of people who are interested in watching that, but that's going to another committee for a vote in March. So that is basically the synopsis of the DCIU legislation update. We could talk about all the many things on there, but we won't. But these are the things that actually have had some movement. So just wanted to let you know about that since our last meeting. Any questions before we move on to the next agenda item? Nope, okay. Agenda item number 4. In a few minutes or less, I think Mr. Madden's going to summarize for us the DCIU Education Press Conference that we attended the other day at the DCIU.
Basically, we can't allow them to pass the bill to change the way they tax property taxes. At this point, that I think came out loud and clear. The pension was an issue. That's going to continue to be an issue. But that was the big thing about it, to make sure that it doesn't pass. And as far as I could read in Delaware County, we're pretty much united against it at this point. So we're trying to reach out to other areas.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, they also addressed what were the charter and cyber schools and pensions and other topics.
Somebody just called in on the telephone. Yeah, it's not from me.
We have a caller who is calling in a public comment, or no?
They can do it at the end.
Or maybe it's a solicitation, you know?
Keep going.
Okay.
Just keep going.
Okay.
They can't just start talking.
Okay, so the last item on our agenda is Governor Wolf's 2017-18 budget address that came out, his budget came out on February 7th. And I am going to, if it's okay with Ms. Deco, put her a little bit on the spot to just, if that's okay, to give us the quick highlights. I will mention before we invite her up, if that's okay. Okay.
I thought you were going to say just go to YouTube and watch it.
Right. Well, you can do that too, but since we have the luxury of our business manager here today, I thought maybe if you wanted to come up, Ms. Deco, and give us the highlights. I could speak to them, but not nearly as accurately and eloquently as you can. And while you're coming up, I just wanted to mention that I believe Chuck and I and a couple of the administrators are going on Thursday, March 2nd, to the EPLC, Educational Policy Leadership Center's Education Policy Forum that's being held at the Penn Center for Educational Leadership at Penn on Thursday, March 2nd, where they're going to give us again, another schooling and the budget and its implications for us as school districts. If anybody's interested in attending, let us know. That we can give you the registration form, but it's scheduled to be from 10 to 12:30 on March 2nd. So, with that, thank you so much. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I hope it's...
I'll just give you some of the brief highlights. The governor's budget that was released on the 7th, and I wouldn't encourage anyone to watch it. It was really pretty dry. I did watch it, and it was pretty dry. It does include $100 million increase for basic education funding, and what that means for Radnor is that we would receive a small additional amount of just over $52,000 in our basic ed funding. Also in the special ed funding, there is an additional $25 million increase for districts across the Commonwealth for special education, which results in an increase of $10,800 for Radnor. So 2 small increases, but increases nonetheless. Level funding for the Ready to Learn block grant, which is good information for us. That's good news. Some of the bad news is there's $50 million in reductions for subsidy for transportation. We live in a high-density district, so we get quite a bit of transportation subsidy, over 20%. So we would likely lose more than we've gained in the special education and the basic ed funding. So that's bad news for us. One of the reasons that PASBO and PSBA believes that there was cuts to transportation is that the governor has long been an advocate for outsourced transportation for school districts. He feels that there would be efficiencies gained by going to a subcontractor that could serve multiple districts in a common area. There's large increases for early intervention and early education in pre-K counts and Head Start. Unfortunately, those are programs that our district doesn't run, but our IU does run them. And then there's a competitive grant program for the school breakfast program that's targeting districts that have 60% more free and reduced lunch. So sounds like a great program. Unfortunately, Radnor's not eligible to participate in that program. There's also stable funding for PlanCon, which will mean districts can continue to rely on the state reimbursement for their construction projects that have been in place, and level funding for career and technology centers.
Great, thank you. That is really helpful and gives us the takeaway points from this year's budget at present. So, I would say, is there any new business?
I just have one item. I asked Adrian Irving to come to our March meeting.
Oh, great. Yeah.
I know we tried to get her, I believe it was in December, and so she said she'd be available in March.
Great.
So I'm working out the time she might have to come towards the end of the meeting to, discuss how she creates perhaps,
That would be
the
fantastic.
legislative document that we share with everybody.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I'm sorry we missed her last time. Thank you for circling back to her again, Kevin, to see if she can come this time. Is there any closing public comment?
You guys flipping a coin back there?
I know.
Cindy Spurtle.
4.
You're not on.
You're
Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne. Questions on the communications, and I have not been to the site to look at the letter as far as what's happening in the state and taxing. But you mentioned letters that can be sent. Now, when there are letters or memos or requests to contact your senator or your representative, there's already a letter prepared.
Do you want to
Put your
pull
name
that
and you
up,
click
maybe?
and go
Yes.
to it. Is that how
Yes.
ours is set up? So it goes directly to them, nothing you do in the,
It's,
you can't click, you can't, there's not, the link, that would be good. They
that would
wouldn't
co- that
have
would
to
co-
do anything.
That would cost something. We did look into that a few years ago, and that was cost prohibitive. But
Oh, it was cost Still?
Yeah.
Still with all the latest and greatest in technology?
But, so what you have is a Word document that you can cut and paste into your own Excel, or your own spreadsheet, and then distribute, or your own email server,
Okay.
and then distribute.
But it's not, it would be great if the link, if we could send it directly to the representatives.
Can I say something about that? So PSEA does have that option. You can go onto, for people who belong to PSEA. And I do believe there might be a Friends thing there, like Friends of PSEA. They also can, we literally click on something, put our zip code in, they give us prepared messages, and we can send them right out. So I don't know.
Is that
maybe-
something that could be coordinated? I mean, that really would get the blast into.
I can
The
talk
other
to
question
our
was,
people.
it's great with the blast, your question about blast emails. I'm thinking since the school community of parents is small as to the entire Radnor Township community. In other words, there's a lot more taxpayers out there than have students that go to the school. Is there a way to, through the different emails we get every day, like the Patch, Suburban, that there's information on the, to use Patch to tell people to go who don't have students in the school. In other words, and the blast email is great for parents and of students.
Yes, so this announcement ran in the Suburban and it ran in the Patch, alerting the community. Other than that, we'd have to kind of do a paid postcard type to reach every single community member.
There
for
isn't any way to
certain.
go through to do it like on a continual, like once every, set up a schedule. That's all, I'm just thinking.
Oh,
the
of
more
course,
people
I
it
can
reaches.
submit it again to the Patch, but just so you know, it has run in those two
Wait,
publications.
How did I?
I don't know.
Well, maybe in coinciding with the letter going out to the community, that would be, if it makes sense, the time to send it out to the Patch, so everybody's sort of, right, that kind of thing. Something to think about. Okay.
Roberta Winters,
No, it's not on.
Roberta Winters, I just wanted to mention that while email blasts are helpful and putting your name on the end of a petition is helpful, there's nothing that beats a personal phone call or a handwritten letter. So I'm really glad that there are talking points that you've outlined so people can even just jot down a postcard, send it off, because I think many of our elected officials are getting bombarded right now by a variety of things. So the personal letters, the postcards, faxes work very well. But just pushing the button and sending it off with your name is not quite as effective.
Thank you, Dr. Winters. Any other public comment? Well then, given that the buzzer's going to go off in 30 seconds, we'll call it a day. Thank you all. See you next month.
Very good.